On April the 18th, 1987, German national Josef Schwab flew into Brisbane, Australia as a tourist. 4 days later, he hires a white Toyota 4Runner four-wheel drive from the Brisbane airport. The next day, Josef visits a gun shop at Woolloongabba and purchases 3 rifles and a shotgun, accompanied with 3,000 rounds of ammunition. Just under 2 months later, Josef Schwab would be dubbed by the Australian media as the Kimberley Killer, after a 5-day killing spree in the Kimberley region of Western Australia and the Northern Territory, resulting in the loss of 5 innocent lives. To this day, the motives behind his crimes remain unknown. Described as Australia's last frontier, the Kimberley region in the northern part of Western Australia is a vast expanse of beautiful scenery, severe climates, and a sparse population. Stretching some 420,000 square kilometres, stretching from the Timor Sea in the north down to the Great Sandy and Tanami Deserts in the south, making it an ideal getaway for those seeking a peaceful and remote excursion. But for 5 people in June of 1987, their ideal trips would turn into a nightmare. A German tourist named Josef Thomas Schwab went on a rampage of killing in the Northern Territory and Western Australia that ended with a fatal shootout with police. It has been reported that Schwab stalked and hunted his victims using high-caliber rifles with telescopic sights. All of his victims were stripped of their clothes, their vehicles burnt out, and dumped by croc-infested rivers, possibly in the hopes that crocodiles would take care of the evidence. Police responded to these crimes by mounting an exhaustive search by road and air. He was located in a bush camp some 650 kilometres away from his final victims and about 10 kilometres outside of the Kimberley town of Fitzroy Crossing. What ensues is a blazing gun battle between Schwab and the Western Australian Police's Tactical Response Group, finally ending with the death of the German gunman. Unable to interview their dead suspect, the police have never been able to understand what motivated this tourist to start killing in the first place. The more they investigated, the less answers they got, and the more questions they had. Those who knew him and interacted with him prior to the events mentioned that he was a relatively normal person with no red flags or inclinations of being a murderer. Nonetheless, thanks mainly to Australian media, Josef Schwab would be forever known as the Kimberley Killer. Josef Thomas Schwab was born on the 25th of November in 1960 in West Germany and grew up in the small town of Pocking. According to an article in the West Australian released shortly after the killing spree, journalist Larry Cross visited Pocking and spoke to those who knew him and found that from the age of 15, he joined a local rifle club and had a fascination for guns from an early age. Others stated that Schwab was ultimately a shy and timid young man. Other than that, not a lot is known about Josef's early life. In 1981, Josef Schwab went on his first visit to Australia when he travelled to Adelaide and lived and worked as a cabinet maker. He joined a pistol club during his stay and spent some of his downtime hunting pigs. Schwab eventually returned to Germany in May of 1984, where he was employed as an armed security guard for over 2 years, and then as a night watchman from 85 to 87. Eventually returning to Australia in May of 1987, it would be here that this seemingly shy and polite 26-year-old would enter into the public consciousness as a mad gunman that would hunt and kill his victims, seemingly without reason. 6 weeks before the killing spree takes place, Josef Schwab travelled from Munich, West Germany to Brisbane, Australia via Bangkok on April the 18th, 1987. He checks into the Atchley Hotel in Queen Street, Brisbane, where he stays for at least 4 or 5 days. The next day, he visits Five Ways Firearms store in Woolloongabba, Brisbane, and purchases a Ruger 223 caliber rifle, a Seiko 308, a Bruno 22 caliber bolt-action rifle, and a Winchester 12-gauge pump-action shotgun, along with 3,000 rounds of ammo. On the 22nd of April, Schwab rents a Toyota 4Runner four-wheel drive from Avis at the Brisbane airport. On May the 6th, Schwab bought petrol from the area near Diamantina River. On May the 9th, he was issued a parking ticket at Mount Isa and possibly stayed in the area to have repairs done to the front end of his Toyota. On May the 20th, he turns up in Darwin. Josef Schwab was then positively sighted at Carmen Plains, Point Stewart, northeast of Darwin, where he apparently engaged in wild buffalo shooting on the 4th of June. On June the 9th, the Bullen family, Marcus and his wife, Winifred, along with their son Lance and his wife Joan, were camping in the Northern Territory near Timber Creek. At 9 a.m, Marcus and his son Lance were scouting for a fishing spot along the Victoria River, telling their wives they would be back in no more than an hour's time. When they didn't return by the afternoon, the wives alerted police at Timber Creek. The next day, police found their husbands' bodies buried in a shallow grave near the river. Their bodies had been stripped of all clothes, and with the remaining personables, were placed in the Mitsubishi station wagon and set alight. In Western Australia, 3 locals from Kununurra, Philip Walkermeyer, his fiancée Julie Warren, and their friend Terry Bolt, set out on a camping trip near Wyndham at the Pentecost River on the 13th of June. The trio, along with 2 others camping nearby, fished in the river until late that night. The following morning, the other 2 campers departed. On June the 15th, after Walkermeyer and Bolt didn't turn up for work, a work colleague went back to the camping spot and spotted Walkermeyer's burnt-out vehicle. Police were quickly alerted. The next morning, police found the naked bodies of Walkermeyer, Warren, and Bolt. All victims had been stripped of their clothes, and again, along with all their possessions, had been placed in Walkermeyer's car and had been burnt. The killer had placed their bodies near the river that was infested with crocodiles, in the hopes that they would dispose of the evidence. Going back to the murder of the Bullens, Marcus and Lance, a specialist team of police was flown down to the Victoria River from Darwin and conducted a 2-day ground and air search. Police found impressions of footwear with a ripped sole, drag marks, and bloodstains from the Bullens. They also found a .223 caliber shell lying nearby. This shell matched the bullet holes that wounded the Bullens. Police had formed the assumption that the killer had been in the area when the Bullens arrived and possibly stalked them to the Victoria River. It was also thought that the killer waited until the men had exited their vehicle and then, armed with a .223 caliber firearm, challenged both men, ordered them to lay on the ground face down, and shot them both through the back. The killer then stripped their victims, put their clothes in their car, and removed the license plates. The car was then driven a short distance and set on fire. The Bullens had been dragged by their legs from where they were murdered and buried at the river's high water mark, possibly in the hopes that crocodiles would destroy the evidence. Roadblocks were implemented and police brought in an Aboriginal tracker. Alongside this, a public warning was issued for anyone to be on the lookout. Despite this, the killer had fled the scene and was now hundreds of kilometres away. Police had determined it to be likely a one-off thrill kill, but by the time of the Pentecost murders, the Western Australia Police realised that they were dealing with something more. After police were called to the crime scene at the Pentecost River and had initially found only one body, that of 25-year-old Julie Warren, stripped of clothes, lying face down near the river, about 500 metres from the group's campsite. A single .223 round had been shot through her back. It wasn't until the next morning that a further 2 bodies were found. The bodies, that of Philip Walkermeyer, 26, and Terry Bolt, 36, were located in the river and on the banks respectively. Both bodies had evidence of multiple bullet wounds and belonged to that of a .223 caliber rifle. Police also found impressions of shoe soles with a rip in them, similar to that of the impressions that were found at Timber Creek. Police and investigators determined that the killer stalked his victims by hiding through the long grass. When he got to about 100 metres, he began firing at the victims at their campsite. The killer then stripped each body and burnt their clothes along with their car after driving it away for a short distance. More roadblocks were implemented and tourists and locals were advised to change their plans if they were considering visiting the areas. A 7-member team of police from the Western Australia Tactical Response Group, or TRG for short, were rushed by chartered jet from Perth to Kununurra to assist local police with the apprehension of the killer. A truck driver came forward with information after the Pentecost murders, stating that shortly before 4 p.m, he saw a column of black smoke coming from the Pentecost River picnic area. After that, he slowed down to let what he described as a white Hilux with a rear canopy with Queensland plates pass him. This vehicle was also positively identified again by a member of the group's fishing trip who had left early the day of the murders. The fisherman states that he saw a man dressed in camouflage gear driving a white Toyota 4Runner with red stripes down the side, also carrying Queensland number plates. Police held a press conference to advise the public to be vigilant as they search for their suspect, and residents of rural areas began arming themselves. A description of the killer's vehicle was now circulated widely, and more reports of sightings came in from various parts of the Kimberley region. The seemingly random killings made national news, and the unknown suspect was being dubbed the Kimberley Killer. The biggest break in the investigation came on July 19, when helicopter pilot Peter Leutenegger was mustering horses for an upcoming rodeo and flew over a similar vehicle that was hidden under camouflage netting near Fitzroy Crossing. He quickly raised the alarm to police. The Western Australia Police were alerted to the suspected vehicle and its whereabouts on Jubilee Downs Station, approximately located 15 kilometres northwest of Fitzroy Crossing. 2 police aircraft took the TRG team from Kununurra to Fitzroy Crossing, where they were told to carefully identify the suspected vehicle. The 7-man team were then taken to the station, where they cautiously approached the vehicle and the bush camp on foot, hiding behind anthills and crawling through long grass. The camp appeared to be well hidden under shrub, and the car had been attempted to be camouflaged also. Unable to positively identify the suspect, the TRG called for a police Cessna 182 to fly overhead in an attempt to flush out the suspect. A man emerged from the driver's side of the Toyota 4Runner and, armed with a semi-automatic weapon, began firing at the plane overhead. The TRG got within 50 metres of the gunman and identified themselves and ordered the man to stop shooting. The gunman was facing the other way, but spotted one of the TRG members and quickly turned and began firing at them. The TRG described the gunman as very accurate with his shots, some even believing that he may have had military training. TRG officer Bob Brown states, quote, "He then pulled the gun to his face and took a look through the telescopic sight. That first shot was instinctive, but he had military training, and he was very accurate, which meant one of my colleagues was a split second from dying." End quote. Realising the dire situation at hand, Mr. Brown opened fire with his M16 and took off the gunman's thumb and shattered the stock of his rifle. The gunman was injured, but not finished. He then ran to his car and emerged with a Ruger Mini 14, a firearm that he could easily handle with one arm. The TRG, being under heavy fire, responded with tear gas grenades, which then set the dry grass nearby on fire. But the gunman had then disappeared into the smoke. The fire then spread to thousands of rounds of ammo that were hidden under the bush nearby, causing them to ignite. Police say it was like being in a war zone. Despite the affray, one of the TRG members made the decision to rescue the vehicle from the flames, fearing that there may be captives inside. During the mayhem that ensued, the gunman had been fatally shot through the back. He was found with his face in the dirt, and his gun was speared into the ground. The bravery and heroics of the TRG team shown that day meant that all the people of the Kimberley could breathe a sigh of relief. But some big questions still remained. What was the reason for these senseless killings? And who was this crazed gunman? After the affray, police searched the vehicle of the Toyota 4Runner with red stripes, carrying Queensland number plates, positively confirming it to be the cited vehicle at the scene of the Pentecost murders. Police also found the gun that matched the rounds found at the Timber Creek crime scene, and the gunman's boots matched the sole imprints, confirming that he was also responsible for the murders there. Upon searching for the car, they found a list of personal items, including licenses, credit cards, a passport, and more rounds of ammunition. The police believe If they hadn't stopped him, he would have continued on his killing spree. The body was flown to Perth for forensic analysis, where they confirmed the identity of the gunman to be that of 26-year-old German tourist Josef Schwab. During their investigation, they traced Schwab's movements from Queensland to the Northern Territory, leading to the Timber Creek murders. Starting in Queensland, they spoke to the gun shop owner, who described Schwab as completely normal. Other than a parking ticket, nothing seemed out of place or pointed directly to a motive for murder. They also found postcards from Schwab sent to his mother back in Germany while he was on his trip, and he always stated he was fine. It was his last postcard, however, that included a mysterious line of, "I am looking forward to something." Journalist Larry Cross, who visited his hometown in Germany, found that Schwab was known by the locals to be somewhat dangerous and actively involved in gangs. One informant stated that he had been carrying a pistol from the age of 16 and feared that he wouldn't hesitate to use it on another person. Adding to that, there were several small criminal convictions against Schwab's name, that of car theft and burglaries. The informant believed that he had skipped the country to avoid these charges, and that's how he came to Australia. But despite all this information, police have never been able to determine a clear motive for Josef Schwab's senseless killings. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. And thanks again for watching. If you would like one of your comments to be shown right here, then start a comment with Shadow Shoutout. And if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and check that notifications bell to keep up to date with the latest videos. And together, we can explore the strange, the terrifying, the unknown, the shadow matter.